Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you hold sacred, your gods, your rituals, your very sense of self, has been declared evil, heathen, and destined for erasure. The people who arrived on your shores did not come only with guns and steel, but with a holy book and a divine mission. And they told you, submit to our God or face eternal damnation. This wasn't just faith. It was conquest dressed in the language of salvation. Welcome to Voice from the Colonized, where we uncover the untold histories of empire, oppression, and resistance from the perspective of the colonized. If you find value in these stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help us continue this work, you'll find financial support links in the description below. Today's episode dives into one of the most powerful tools of European domination, religious imperialism, how Christianity reinforced European supremacy. The fusion of cross and crown. European imperialism was never only about economics or politics, it was also deeply religious. The sword and the cross moved together. Conquest was often framed as a holy missioner, way to bring civilization and salvation to the so-called heathens of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. From the very beginning, Christianity was weaponized as ideology. The papal bulls of the 15th century, including Inter Caetera, 1493, explicitly gave European monarchs divine sanction to seize non-Christian lands. This was the Doctrine of Discovery, a legal theological framework declaring that non-Christians had no legitimate ownership of their lands. As historian Robert A. Williams, Jr. writes in The American Indian in Western Legal Thought, Discovery doctrine was nothing less than a theological justification for conquest. It defined indigenous peoples not as equals, but as obstacles to be overcome in the name of Christ and civilization. Christopher Columbus carried not only the flag of Spain, but also the cross. Hernán Cortés justified his brutal conquest of the Aztec Empire by insisting he was saving souls. Missionaries were often the first wave of colonization, softening resistance, translating languages, and paving the way for imperial rule. The message was clear. Conversion was not just about religion. It was about surrender. Demonizing the indigenous. Religious imperialism relied on demonization. Indigenous gods and practices were portrayed as pagan, satanic, and barbaric. In the Americas, the Spanish declared that human sacrifice among the Aztecs proved the savagery of native peoples, while ignoring their own inquisitions and witch burnings in Europe. In Africa, traditional spiritual systems, rich in cosmology, healing, and philosophy, were dismissed as witchcraft. Converts were taught to despise their ancestors and rituals. In South Asia, missionaries condemned Hindu temples as idolatrous and dismissed Islam as a false religion. Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian novelist, captured this process vividly in Things Fall Apart. The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. By attacking belief systems, Europeans attacked the foundation of identity. They created the idea that to be civilized was to be Christian and, by extension, to be European. The slave trade and the Bible, perhaps nowhere was the hypocrisy of Christian imperialism more brutal than in the Atlantic slave trade. Slaveholders used the Bible to justify human bondage. Verses like slaves, obey your masters, Ephesians chapters 6-5, were endlessly repeated to enslaved Africans. Conversion was forced, sometimes under torture. Enslaved people were told that accepting Christianity would redeem their souls, even if their bodies remained in chains. Missionaries on plantations often worked hand in hand with slave masters. They preached obedience, humility, and submission, molding enslaved people into docile laborers. Religion became psychological control, reinforcing a racial hierarchy where Europeans claimed divine right to rule. Historian Vincent Harding once observed in There Is a River, "The Bible became the most powerful weapon of the oppressor, and yet, in the hands of the enslaved, it also became the greatest weapon of resistance. Indeed, enslaved people reinterpreted Christianity. They found hope in the story of Exodus, in the promise of liberation, and in spirituals that cried for freedom." This duality defined colonial faith, both chains and keys to break them. Education and the colonial church. Religious imperialism was not only about conversion, but also about control through education. Missionary schools across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific taught colonized children not only the catechism, but also European language, history, and worldview. Local knowledge systems were dismissed as backward. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in Decolonizing the Mind, explained, "The biggest weapon wielded, and actually daily unleashed by imperialism against a collective defiance, is the cultural bomb. The effect of the cultural bomb is to annihilate a people's belief in their names, in their languages, in their environment, in their heritage of struggle." This cultural bomb was often detonated through religious schooling. Missionaries shaped the imagination of colonized youth, replacing indigenous identity with European Christian ideals. This educational project created colonial elites, local converts, who often served as intermediaries between Europeans and indigenous populations. These elites sometimes gained privileges, but were always kept subordinate to white colonizers. The white man's burden and the civilizing mission. By the 19th century, religious imperialism had merged with racial ideology. Christianity was presented as part of the civilizing mission. Missionaries argued that Africans and Asians lived in darkness and needed the light of Christ. This rhetoric dovetailed with the infamous phrase, "the white man's burden," as Rudyard Kipling wrote in his 1899 poem urging Americans to colonize the Philippines. "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need." Christianity was thus used to justify colonial policies, from the destruction of sacred groves in Africa, to the banning of indigenous festivals in the Americas, to the suppression of Islamic law in colonized Muslim lands. Even humanitarian projects, like building hospitals and schools, were often conditional upon conversion. Aid was tied to submission. Healing came with strings attached. Pray first, then we will feed you. Legacies of religious imperialism. The scars of religious imperialism remain with us today. Many colonized societies still struggle with erased traditions, languages, rituals, and cosmologies lost under Christian pressure. Internalized shame persists, with some communities still viewing their ancestral practices as inferior or demonic. Conversion-based conflict continues to haunt post-colonial nations where religious identity is tied to politics and social hierarchy. Frantz Fanon, in The Wretched of the Earth, warned of this legacy. Colonialism is not satisfied merely with holding a people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. By a kind of perverted logic, it turns to the past of the oppressed people, distorts it, disfigures it, and destroys it. Even the modern global dominance of Western Christianity cannot be separated from the history of empire. Churches, schools, and missions across the world stand as reminders that faith was not freely chosen, but often imposed under colonial power. Rethinking Christianity and Empire. As historian Edward Andrews explains in Native Apostles, the Christian missionary was not simply a religious figure. He was a cultural agent of empire, exporting Europe's worldview as God's truth. The Church blessed conquests, legitimized slavery, and preached obedience to colonial rule. The idea that European civilization was superior and that Christianity was its crown jewel allowed empires to rule not just through guns but through hearts and minds. Conclusion. The story of religious imperialism is not just about faith, it is about power. It is about how the Bible became a sword, how salvation became conquest, and how a message of love was twisted into a justification for domination. The legacy of religious imperialism still shapes our world. To understand colonialism, we must understand the role of faith in empire. This has been Voice from the Colonized, where we uncover the silent stories of the past. If you found value in this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to support us in continuing this work, please check the financial support links in the description below. History is not just about the victors. It's also about the voices they tried to silence. And here, those voices speak again.